In the heart of 1944 Los Angeles, the city buzzed with the energy of a nation embroiled in World War II. Military men flooded the streets, USO clubs flourished, and the glamour of Hollywood shone brighter than ever, masking the darkness lurking in the shadows. On a crisp October night, a young socialite, full of life and brimming with promise, was found brutally murdered in her West Hollywood apartment. Her death would shake the city, leaving behind more questions than answers. To this day, her murder remains an unsolved mystery, a haunting tale of lost potential, veiled secrets, and a life cut tragically short. This is the story of Georgette Bauerdorf. Hello, friends. My name is Marcia, and this is Midwest Murders. Los Angeles in 1944 was a city transformed by the war effort. With millions of servicemen passing through its ports, LA became a crucial hub for military operations on the Pacific Front. The war industry boomed, and so did the population, as workers flocked to the city in search of defense jobs. The social scene, too, was in full swing, with young women like Georgette volunteering at the Hollywood Canteen, a hotspot where soldiers and stars mingled for a brief reprieve from the realities of war. Despite the glitz, Los Angeles was also grappling with rising crime rates. The influx of people, combined with wartime blackouts and shortages, made it easier for criminal activity to go unchecked. Women were particularly vulnerable, with many reporting assaults in the streets. It was against this backdrop that Georgette's life came to a violent end, her death reflecting not only the darker side of LA's war years, but also the fear and uncertainty that permeated the city. Georgette Elise Bauerdorf, age 20, was the attractive brunette daughter of George F. Bauerdorf, a wealthy New York oil man. Her mother, Constance, died when Georgette was only 11. Georgette attended the Westlake School for Girls in the Holmby Hills section of Los Angeles, where she graduated in 1941. She lived with her father, stepmother Thelma, and older sister Connie in a luxurious duplex apartment at the El Palacio Apartments, located at 8493 Fountain Avenue in Hollywood's exclusive Sunset Strip area of West Hollywood. Her family traveled considerably and were seldom there, leaving Georgette alone in the family apartment. She considered herself the doll with the shoe-button eyes and dreamed she was the heroine of exciting adventures. She was considered good-hearted, generous, and fun-loving. Her father provided an allowance for her to spend as she pleased on clothes, nightclubs, trips, and fun. After completing school, she tried to find some purpose in her life, working as a newspaper copy girl with the LA Times in the Women's Service Bureau and volunteering as a junior hostess on Wednesday evenings at the Hollywood Canteen, located at the corner of Sunset and Cahuenga Boulevard. The Hollywood Canteen catered to enlisted men, and most nights 2 bands played and the volunteer hostesses danced with the soldiers. Georgette dated many of the GIs she met at the canteen and wouldn't let them spend any of their $50 per month military pay on her. She took them riding in her car, entertained them at nightclubs, always picking up the tab, and even allowed them to stay overnight if they complained they had no place to stay. She believed that if the men were willing to fight for their country, she should do all she could for them. She displayed her wealth with considerable extravagance. Her family had moved back to New York on August 28th, leaving Mrs. Rose Gilbert, her father's secretary, as her unofficial chaperone. On Wednesday, October 11th, 1944, Georgette, accompanied by Mrs. Gilbert, withdrew $175 from her bank account, purchased a round-trip ticket to El Paso, did some shopping, and had her hair done. When her errands were complete, she headed home with about $75 in her purse. Mrs. Gilbert described her as being in high spirits. Georgette had plans to meet another junior hostess, June Ziegler, at the canteen at 6:30. June was running a little late and found Georgette sitting in her car knitting. Georgette told June she was nervous, but didn't say why, and she asked June to spend the night with her. However, they did not spend the night together and separated at 11:30 p.m. when they both left the canteen through the side door. Shortly before midnight, after taking his sister dancing at the Hollywood Palladium, Sergeant Gordon A. Adlin, who was in Hollywood on furlough from duty in the Aleutian Islands, was hitchhiking near the Hollywood Canteen on his way to the Clover Club. He planned to meet his bartender brother, who was due to get off work at 2 a.m. Georgette picked him up on Sunset Boulevard and drove him for a few miles. She talked about her boyfriend in Texas and said she was expecting a telephone call from him that night when she got home. She dropped Sergeant Adlin off after a few miles and he got another ride which took him closer to his destination. By his own estimation, he spent about 15 minutes with Georgette. He would later say, "She seemed like a friendly girl, and I appreciated the ride, but she never should have picked up a soldier at midnight." At midnight, Fred C. Atwood, a maintenance man who lived in the basement apartment directly below Georgette, heard what he thought was women's high heels clicking back and forth on the kitchen floor upstairs. A little later, he heard a crash, like somebody dropped a tray. Then it was silent. The following morning, Thursday, October 12th, Mr. and Mrs. Atwood and their daughter entered Georgette's apartment for a routine daily cleaning at about 11:10 a.m. Finding the door slightly open and not being able to locate Georgette on the first floor, Mrs. Atwood heard water running in one of the second-floor bathrooms and went up to check. She found Georgette, clad only in her pajama shirt, face down in a nearly full tub of water. The hot water was still running. Screaming for her husband, they believed Georgette had fainted and released the water in the tub. That's when they realized Georgette was dead. A.L. Hutchinson, L.A. County Deputy Sheriff, arrived on the scene at 12:10 p.m. He found there was no evidence of a party having been held. However, there were 2 ashtrays on the bedroom floor with cigarette butts still in them. No alcohol was present. There were 2 sheets lying on the bed that hadn't been disturbed, and a blanket had been thrown back. There was an indentation in the pillow, and it looked as if someone had been lying on the bed on the 2 sheets and covered by the blanket. He found small bloodstains between the bed and the door leading to the bathroom, which appeared to have been wiped in an effort to clean it up, and may have been from a nosebleed, which Georgianne was prone to. Her clothing was scattered over the chairs and contents of her purse strewn on the floor. While police originally thought this indicated a struggle, it was later learned that Georgette was messy and tended to leave her clothes where she dropped them. While her pajama bottoms were found badly torn, police were inclined to believe it was an old tear. They ultimately believed no struggle had taken place. While there was no money in her purse, expensive jewelry was on the dresser undisturbed. Her sister's expensive green Oldsmobile sports coupe, which Georgette drove, was missing. It was later found abandoned in the Harlem section of L.A., 10 miles from her apartment. The key was left in the ignition, and the gas tank was empty. Badly smeared fingerprints were found on the key and door handles. Later it was determined that the fingerprints did not belong to any known criminal, nor to any serviceman, all of whom had prints on file. Police theorized that the car thief and possible killer was an acquaintance. Otherwise, he would not have known it was her car and where it was parked. They also felt she would not have let a stranger into the apartment, dressed only in her pajamas. Georgette was last seen at the Hollywood Canteen. Police interviewed dozens of other junior hostesses and discovered that the night before, while working her shift, Georgette had been forced to jitterbug with a soldier against her wishes. He had kept cutting in on her that night when she was dancing with others, and she danced with him to avoid trouble. He was described as about 28 years old, average height, with olive skin and a dark complexion. This man would later voluntarily come forward. Identified as 24-year-old Sergeant Cosmo Volpe, an Air Force mechanic from New York, he stated he didn't realize she was mad and he just wanted to dance. Camp records showed he had returned to his quarters before Georgette was killed, and he was eliminated as a suspect. Dr. Frank R. Wells conducted the autopsy and reported that she had been raped. The immediate cause of death was asphyxiation due to a 9 by 9 inch part of an elastic bandage, similar to those manufactured abroad before the war, being stuffed down her throat. Even though she was left in a bathtub nearly full of water, there was no evidence she drowned. There was a mark on her right shoulder and over her right eye, likely caused by a fall. He also found scratches around her mouth, likely caused by the assailant ripping part of the rag from her mouth. Later, marks appeared indicating that she had put up a fight, including a 3-inch scratch on her abdomen, bruising on her left hip, the back of her head, and the knuckles of her right hand, with distinct thumb and index finger marks on her right thigh. Her lips were also badly bruised. Police determined that the elastic bandage in her mouth had not been imported into the country since August 1939. They were not sure if Georgette had the bandage in her possession or it was owned by a soldier returning from overseas. A man living in another apartment who wished to remain anonymous claimed he heard a woman scream, "Stop it, you're killing me," at 2 or 3 a.m. Although this was quite unusual for the neighborhood, he did not call the police. Her time of death was thought to be between midnight and 2 a.m. The light bulb in the hall outside her apartment was unscrewed, according to maintenance man Ernest Tate, but it was common for it to become loosened by the slight earthquake tremors, and he had tightened it from time to time. Police found her red leather diary, in which she wrote meticulously. There was a mysterious Mr. Wade mentioned the day before her murder. He has never been identified. She had been writing to Private Jerome M. Brown, an anti-aircraft artillery trainee from Chicago who was stationed at Fort Bliss, Texas. She had planned to meet him in Texas on the afternoon of her death for his graduation ceremony. They had met at the canteen on June 13th, but he hadn't seen her since, although they had exchanged correspondence since he returned to Texas. Her family did not return to L.A. during the investigation. Instead, following the autopsy and coroner's inquest, Georgette's body was released to her uncle, Sam Wolfe, by the Pierce Brothers Mortuary and was sent via railroad to New York City. She was buried in the Woodlawn Cemetery in the Bronx in the family plot, although she was not placed in the family mausoleum. The war would be over in less than a year, and the old converted barn that housed the Hollywood Canteen would shut down on Thanksgiving Day in 1945. In a later interview, Sergeant Gordon Adland, the hitchhiker Georgette picked up the night she was killed, told a reporter that he had voluntarily came forward to police when he sent them a letter after he saw an article about Georgette's death. He had left California the next day on his way back to the Aleutian Islands, but felt he had to let them know that she had picked him up the night before. While he said in the letter that she seemed nervous, he would later change that, telling a reporter, "I assumed that because she kept looking out the rearview mirror. The reality is that she was doing that while switching lanes. Some drivers don't trust their rearview mirrors." He also stated, "There should have been my fingerprints on the passenger side from where I got in and out of the car, but the police never contacted me about it." Sergeant Adland was never brought back to Los Angeles to be interviewed or to testify, but an officer from the provost marshal was sent to question him. It is quite possible that Sergeant Adland was the last person to see Georgette before she was killed. On a side note, the timeline of her death doesn't sit quite right with me. While she certainly may have been killed between midnight and 2 a.m., Georgette was found in a bathtub 3/4 full with the water still running. Since the bathtub was not overflowing, it would seem to me that the assailant had to have left the apartment much later, after he turned on the water and before the tub filled. Did the police miss an opportunity to look for suspects in and around the apartment closer to the time of her discovery? Nonetheless, the murder of Georgette Bauerdorf remains a chilling reminder of the unsolved mysteries that continue to haunt Los Angeles. Her case has baffled investigators for decades, and despite numerous theories and possible suspects, no one has ever been brought to justice. Georgette's story is one of the many tragic tales lost in the folds of time, her vibrant life overshadowed by her brutal end. Can justice still be found, or is Georgette's story destined to remain another cold case in the annals of LA's forgotten crimes? If you have any thoughts, theories, or comments about the death of Georgette Bauerdorf, please leave them in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, and may the truth reveal itself in the shadows.